We're joined now by former Homeland Security Advisor to George W. Bush and CBS News national security analyst Fran Townsend, and former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. Mary Ellen, I want to start with you. You heard about those careful calculations Stephen Paddock took. What does that say to you about how careful his planning was? What does that tell you about him?
It tells me two things. He wanted the note to be found. He's very meticulous in the planning, and to carry that down to recording the exact distances between him and the ground, between him and the targets. I think it really is very telling about how detailed he was.
Fran, at the end of last year, DHS and FBI did a threat assessment, and they talked about lone wolf shooters, and they talked about the fact that there were soft targets, the ability to hit civilians, and one thing they listed in the catalog here was the ability to inflict significant casualties with weapons that do not require specialized knowledge, access, or training. Then they mentioned the shootings in Orlando and San Bernardino. How much are guns a part of the Homeland Security picture?
Oh, this is a tremendous problem. And you know, while I think the legislation that Dianne Feinstein's talking about on bump fire stocks doesn't go far enough, right? You need to prohibit the purchase, the sale, and the possession of these bump fire stocks. But we're not talking about the single greatest factor that it is in lethality, which is these high-capacity ammunition magazines. That's what allows you to fire many bullets before reloading. And literally, the empirical evidence is those are the single greatest factor. When you use that kind of a weapon, it increases lethality 300%. And so in states where they ban these high-capacity magazines, they've reduced the likelihood of a mass shooting by 63%. And so if we really want to have an impact, what you need to do is stop the access to these high-capacity ammunition magazines.
Mary Ellen, we have about 40 seconds left. What does it tell you as a profiler that somebody who purchases a lot of guns over a period of time, or who buys this much ammunition, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that there's a real fascination with weapons, especially if it covers a broad array of weapons. And if you compound that with someone who also has a fascination with violence and who may manifest certain personality traits, which we saw in the crime scene, that's a very lethal combination.
All right, we're going to have to hold it right there. We'll be back with more of this conversation and my thoughts on hope after tragedy. Stay with us. We continue our conversation with former Homeland Security Advisor to George W. Bush and CBS News national security analyst Fran Townsend, and former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. Fran, I want to start with you. We were talking about the availability of semi-automatic weapons. As a terrorist threat, there have been al-Qaeda operatives or terrorists who have pointed this out, the accessibility in America.
That's right. Adam Gaddan, who is an American-born al-Qaeda member, released a video in 2011 calling on al-Qaeda members and like-minded terrorists in the United States to take advantage of the accessibility to guns in the United States. Frankly, I think authorities have been surprised, myself included, that we've not seen more of this. But I would point out just this week, authorities announced a 2016 plot in New York City where taking guns and shooting inside the New York City subway system was an aspect of that plot. And so, you know, it's not like al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the terrorists don't watch what happens in the United States. And the fact that Las Vegas was not terrorist-related doesn't mean that terrorists aren't watching the method of operation and considering it for their own plans.
So they can go to school on this, essentially.
Absolutely.
Mary Ellen, let me ask you about the motive, the fact that there is not one yet identified. Is that very curious to you?
It is very curious, but we may have to look at this a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is there may not be an external trigger. This may, because it's so complicated and because it's so sensational, extraordinary, that it may have been self-triggered by him years ago, somebody who did not want to be ordinary, somebody who had a interest in violence and collected guns. This was a plan that he had in the works for years, and he made the decision of when he would act it out. So we may be looking for the wrong thing. It may not have been externally triggered, and that makes it harder to find out.
If you were doing this, what would you look for? I mean,
I'd be going into interviews with other people, really exploring his personality and not specifically looking for an external trigger. Like, was it the hotel? Was it the music industry? I'd be exploring in detail his personality and looking to see whether or not, if this really is someone who has psychopathic traits, that would explain a lot as well, which is not a mental illness. It's a personality disorder. You have a very lethal combination of an individual here, and I think, unfortunately, the general public really does misunderstand violence and who's capable of it.
Fran, going forward, big venue events, what can change to protect them?
Well, let's remember our current understanding is people, as they entered the venue, the 22,000 at the concert, they looked at the bags. It wasn't as though there was no security at the perimeter, but when you're talking about someone who planned to do it from outside the perimeter, it becomes much more difficult. I think what you'll see is in the United States, hotels and complexes are going to look at screening bags. Why could he get all of these guns and weapons up there? A lot of weight, a lot of ammunition. You know, at the Mandalay Bay, there is a last security guard before you go up the elevator. Maybe you put screening there. It's a big complex. This is very complicated for large hotel complexes, but complexes in Las Vegas immediately following, like the Wynn, actually did institute screening.
So is your view that hotels basically are going to have to make this a new part of their operating procedure?
You know, I think that people are going to look at that, and I think it's far more likely, John. I think, frankly, what we ought to do is look at the actual root cause of the problem, which is these high capacity ammunition magazines, and deal with it at that level as opposed to imposing the problem on the hotels and their guests.
All right. Well, Mary Ellen, quickly, what would you be asking the girlfriend?
I would be asking her to just open-ended questions, to tell me about his personality. Tell me what it was like when you traveled with him. Tell me what it was like when the two of you were alone at home. Just walk me through your dinner, walk me through, and not have her screen anything she tells me. I'll screen it. You just tell me what life was like with him, and just get her into a narrative.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much. We've run out of time. Thanks to you both, and we'll be right back.